And I'd like to introduce Mr. Noe Torres, who would like to give some introductions, and then we'll start with the program.
Okay, thank you, Ruben. I was working on a book about Texas UFO incidents, famous UFO-related incidents in the state of Texas, about 2 years ago, when I ran across this interesting story about a particular case that happened on the Texas-Mexico border in the Big Bend country of Texas in West Texas. And as the story started developing, and later when I hooked up with Ruben, the story became so significant to me that it ended up that we shifted the whole focus of it, and it became a book entirely of itself, just this one story. Today we're going to tell you about this. This is really a developing story. It's a brand new story. It hasn't been around that long in UFO circles. And so really this is the beginning of a whole new interesting crash retrieval story that and we're seeing it from its inception. It's in the beginning stages. We're just starting to do the field work involved in interviewing witnesses and visiting sites and so forth. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into the investigation that we've done in northern Mexico, the sites that we've been to and so forth, the witnesses that we've talked to, Ruben is going to start by giving you a brief rundown of the incident itself and how it happened.
Thank you, Noe. Just to add a point, 2 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, I was here at the Crash Retrieval Conference. I was a participant. I was just sitting down there. And I never dreamed that I would be up here 2 years later on a real significant crash retrieval case. So what I want to say is maybe one of you will be up here someday on your particular investigation. So if we can go ahead and start there with our first slide. 1974, Coyame, Mexico UFO crash, new revelations. So I'm going to give you a recap about how this incident started. At August 25th in 1974, at 10:07 p.m., radars along the Texas Gulf Coast picked up a strange aircraft headed toward Corpus Christi, Texas. The UFO sped at approximately 2,500 miles per hour. The altitude was 75,000 feet. From a position about 155 miles out at sea, the object moved inbound toward the Texas coast. Due to the speed and altitude, officials feared an ICBM. Jet interceptors were ready. Slowing to under 2,000 miles per hour and dropping to 45,000 feet, the UFO zoomed past Brownsville and entered Mexican airspace about 40 miles south of that city. Meanwhile, a small airplane heading from El Paso south to Mexico City unknowingly moved into the path of the oncoming UFO. At 10:30 p.m., the two radar blitz became one in the skies over Coyame, Mexico. The UFO and the airplane slammed into the desert in an area known as El Llano, which means the plain, just northeast of Coyame. The next morning, a Mexican spotter plane found two wreckage sites. This is our Google satellite map of the same area, but it'll show you approximately where the crash had occurred. Oh, yes. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Let me just interject here. I want to show these two maps back to back. You can see over here, you can see the Texas border, Texas-Mexico border demarked by the Rio Grande River. And here you have the tiny little Texas town of Candelaria, which is mentioned in the so-called Deneb report, which we'll talk more about. And just within 30 miles, there's a mountain range that runs right along the Rio Grande River, and then right in this area is where this crash retrieval happened. And I'm just going to flip here quickly back and forth between the Google Earth map of the area and the more conventional map there. And this area that you see that's kind of distinct whitish soil here in this area is known as El Llano. Okay.
Thank you, Noe. Mexican soldiers found a nearly intact silver disc, approximately 16 feet 5 inches in diameter and about 5 feet in height. There were two indentations. One was a 12-inch jagged hole on one end and a 24-inch dent on the opposite side of the craft. As the Mexicans loaded up the crash debris and headed back to their base, U.S. intelligence monitored the situation from a nearby Texas border. A U.S. recovery team assembled at Fort Bliss utilizing 3 Hueys and a Sea Stallion. Shortly after, U.S. surveillance satellites and aircraft noted that the Mexican truck convoy had stopped dead in its tracks. Photos also showed bodies on the ground. Fearing that the Mexicans had accidentally unleashed a lethal biological or chemical agent within 30 miles of the Texas border, the Fort Bliss crash retrieval team was sent into Mexico wearing full biohazard gear. The U.S. team found all the Mexicans dead and proceeded to lift away the crashed UFO with the Sea Stallion. After the UFO was removed, soldiers exploded the remaining evidence. The U.S. team moved the disc to a hidden area in the Davis Mountains. Hours later, in the dead of night, a truck convoy drove it to Atlanta. With that, folks, we're going to now go into our initial field investigation to Coyame. And something I just wanted to point out real quickly, that back in 1971, there was a film made, The Andromeda Strain. And curiously, it was filmed in a little town called Chapter. And Noe, it's about, how close is it from Presidio? Or
it's about 30 miles.
30 miles away. Isn't that interesting how we're getting the real scenario? So now I'll turn it over to Noe, and Noe will share with you our investigation.
Okay, so Ruben and I have been down to Coyame several times, and the first time we went was in January. It's a very unique place, and we're going to give you, first of all, kind of the context. Here is a satellite map of the tiny little village. There's only, a little over 600 people living there, and the population has been fairly consistent, over time since this crash happened. A very small, typical little Mexican village centered with a plaza that we'll show you pictures of later. Now, there's one significant thing, is that the crash is said to have happened in Coyame, referring to the municipality. If you look on this slide, the municipality, unlike the town, which is also called Coyame, the town down here, the municipality is what we might call a county. In Mexico, they call it a municipio. It's a very large area land-wise. It encompasses close to 5,000 square miles. But even so, despite this large size of this municipality, the total population is less than 1,500. So just to give you an idea of the scale and the scope of things out there. The little town itself, which is the largest community within this huge municipality, here's a picture of what we would call the downtown or center of town area. It's a place where the folks, we've met a lot of the folks in town. We've gotten to know the mayor of the town, his wife who runs the restaurant, the town's only little restaurant, and it's a bus stop also for the buses that travel from the Texas border into Chihuahua City, which is a large city that's nearby, about 100 miles away. So this is a picture of us in the town square, once again giving you a sense for the surroundings. One of our first stops was a public library where we received assistance as far as the town's history, an overview of the geographic area, how to get out to some of the sites that we wanted to visit that our previous research had indicated. And it's a tiny little library, but the folks there were very friendly and helpful to us. So we began with our investigation, and we found out that the villagers, in interviewing the villagers and talking to other UFO investigators from that area of Mexico, we found out that we needed to take this road out into the desert, into the vast stretches of the area. And I want to just show you, let me back up here. I wanted to show you back on the map of the municipality just for a moment. The town itself, as I mentioned, is down here in the lower section of the municipality. And the arrow, the blue arrow, is where we think, based on our analysis of the trajectories of the two aircraft and other details of the report, is where we think that the initial collision, mid-air collision between the plane and the unidentified happened in this area, and the town is down here. So to get between those 2 points, it was a very interesting trip for us, and we're going to give you kind of a Reader's Digest version, condensed. And we're going to start off with a short video clip so that you'll get some sense. We hired a guide who took us out to the area. The roads are of course, dirt roads, desert roads. And this that you see in this slide is actually close to the small town of Coyame, so the road here is actually in pretty good condition. As we got closer to El Llano, where this crash site we believe happened, the roads would often disappear or branch off into several different branches, and it was, in some places it would dip down into, turn into a riverbed, and there were places where there seemed to be no road at all.
If you notice, the road is wet here, and sometimes there will be a freakish storm, and you can get caught in a small flood, so that's why it's really advisable to bring someone that knows the area.
Another interesting point here is notice the vegetation. It's very low brush country, and it's beautiful desert scenery out there. We should mention, as this video clip winds down, that this is an ongoing hotspot for UFO sightings. The 1974 alleged UFO crash that we were there to investigate is only one of many, many stories that we hear from the local people there. And as we go along, we hope to bring some of those stories to you. So this just gives you a feel for what it's like. So we're going to talk about what we found in our investigation once we, braved the elements out there. The rattlesnakes and the scorpions out in the desert as we stomped around, we found some interesting things that we'll talk about here. And as we begin on this, we also want to mention that we just returned from another trip that was funded by a national cable TV channel, and they sent a television production crew down there with us this time, cast and crew, for a documentary about the Coyame UFO crash. There continues to be a great deal of interest in it, and it's being viewed as one of the most significant crash retrieval events that has happened in recent history. So we were very excited to be invited by this national cable channel for an episode that is scheduled to air in February or March of 2008. We'll give you more information about that, and more information will be posted on our website. Due to legal and contractual obligations, they didn't want us to release more details at the present time. So one of the sites that we saw there was this mysterious pit. The pit looks like a man-made mine shaft going straight down, and it's in the middle of a 30-foot diameter circle of charred or blackened dirt. And it's right in the middle of the desert, about 5 miles outside the town of Coyame. Now, one of the interesting things that I've talked to people about is that people survive in these harsh desert communities of Mexico by intimately getting to know all their surroundings Everybody knows everybody in town and in the surrounding ranches. And this is their method of survival, is to know what goes on at all times. And yet, none of the villagers knew anything about the history, origin, or purpose of this strange pit that we were showing you in this picture. And in fact, they're the ones who gathered us up and went with us and took us out to this location. This mysterious pit, which you can see here from Google Earth, it's even visible from out in outer space. It's this circular patch of blackened earth. There's no habitations anywhere around there. It's about 5 miles outside the small town that we were talking about earlier. And to the villagers there, it's a complete mystery. They had military authorities, Mexican military authorities, come through and warn them that they were not to get close to that was a site that they should avoid at all costs, and that if they got too close, that the ground was going to collapse underneath them and they were going to fall down into whatever is down there.
What Noe mentioned that we were with this other production company. One of them was a scientist, and he had a Geiger counter and actually got some hits in this particular spot here. So one of our goals eventually is to go back and do some excavation and find out what is more below this. There's a number of automotive parts and vehicle parts and that we need to continue to investigate.
There was a lot of metallic debris all around here, including pieces of aluminum. We're going to show you a few in a while. And then the folks that went with us on this last trip, one of them actually went down in here with a Geiger counter probe, holding a Geiger counter probe, and we saw a dramatic spike all of a sudden as he got down about 5 or 6 feet. This was just one of many interesting pieces that we found in the area of blackened dirt, and this is a water temperature gauge of unknown origin, and we're still trying to find out more about it. Obviously of U.S. manufacture. And here is a short video clip that's just going to give you a sense for what it looks like. There was at one point an attempt to encircle this with a barbed wire fence, kind of a rather flimsy barbed wire fence that portions of it have over the years come down.
What's interesting too, the area is discolored, as Noe's mentioned, it's dark, but also there's very little vegetation right around this area. That's something else that we noted.
There were also the team that we just went with that included Dr. Ron Milioni, professor at St. John's, and has degrees in mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. There's an interesting piece that we found there in the sand. Dr. Milioni found a lot of interesting colorations in the sand. He took soil core samples as well as radiation readings, and he and the team collected a lot of samples from all around this area. He was noting about how the area right around this shaft is totally unlike the soil and the vegetation and everything growing all around it. He suggested that it seemed to him that there was evidence of some kind of massive underground explosion that had taken place here. This was a basis for an article that Ruben and I wrote for the UFO magazine, where we focused specifically on this mysterious site in the July 2007 edition. Some of you all might have seen this. This was one of the reasons that this particular cable company decided that they wanted to do this. We're going to talk about the second site, which is even more eerie, really, in some ways, and it's also related to this first site because it's just a short distance away, less than a mile. That's the airplane debris field. Here's a Google map, a Google Earth map. You've got the mystery pit. I zoomed a little bit farther away this time so that you get this perspective. About a mile away, up just up this little dirt road, is this kind of a quarter-mile diameter area in the desert where this airplane crashed and scattered debris over this wide area. Now, what's interesting is that, according to Dr. Milioni and others who have seen this site with us, it does not seem to represent a typical, the typical type of crash site that you would find from the crash of a small airplane. One of the interesting and most striking aspects of the debris that we found is that most of it had been liquefied. The aluminum skin, aluminum alloy skin, and parts from the airplane were actually jellified into puddles, and then which then hardened. And Dr. Milioni refers to it as jellified aluminum.
I brought samples, so after our presentation, for those of you who would like to see the molten aluminum metal, it's quite interesting.
So Dr. Milioni and others we've talked to point out that there was an intense heat involved at some point before, during, or after the crash of this plane. And here are some larger parts that we found. This was one of the villagers who took us out there and said, you know, we know that there's this crash site. We don't really know the story behind it because Mexican military came and they blocked access to this site by anybody from our town. And they cordoned off the area. They carried away, you know, pieces of the plane. They left some of the smaller pieces. Either they were pressed for time or they didn't care about taking the rest of this. So here are some sections of the plane that we found out there.
And of course, the question is, was this the plane involved in the 1974 UFO incident? We really don't know yet, but we're gathering the evidence here of the type of plane based on the parts, and we've had some inquiry as to perhaps it's of the same vintage.
One of the folks that went with us did a little research into this, and because of its retractable landing gear and because of some of the other components that were found at the scene, pieces were found at the scene, the guess is that this could have been a Beechcraft Bonanza or Mooney Acclaim, circa 1970s or early 80s. So that's where we stand right now. Here is a short video clip that gives you an oversight of the initial crash site as we found it when we first walked upon it. And you can imagine our excitement to, you know, here it was this story we were following up on about a UFO and airplane mid-air collision, and suddenly we were standing in this debris field and there were pieces of airplane wreckage all around us. And you know, you can imagine, you know, the excitement of that.
Here you see them holding pieces of the molten aluminum, and it's scattered all throughout that area there. It's right within the sand grain. You just have to move it and you'll find chunks of it.
We were looking under every little brush and, you know, rock and stuff, and there's these pieces of aluminum, molten.
Now, here's something for you investigators out there, something that we learned. This gentleman here took a lot of the aluminum back for recycling. And, you know, that could be problematic if there's a crash site and you're going out there to gather evidence, and maybe the locals will go ahead and strip it and take it away and sell it for recycling. I mean, we're in Mexico, and
we were actually fighting him for some of this wreckage, okay? He would pull and we would pull.
So that's something to throw out there for you folks that may be involved in another country.
And we found out later that now when people come and ask about this crash, that the local people there in the village tell them, well, some Americanos came and they took all of it away. Well, we didn't actually get that much. The third site we're going to talk about is called El Llano. We think that this was the initial crash site of the mid-air collision, and then perhaps the Mexican military had gone quite a distance away from the initial crash site, and you know, before they became bogged down by whatever it is that killed them. subsequent to the U.S. crash retrieval. I'm going to set geographically the stage for you again. Here's Texas, is represented by just this gray blob, and then the Mexican map here. You've got Coyame down here, and then you've got where the trajectories of the aircraft involved indicate that the crash might have taken place. And then the U.S. Team came down the Rio Grande River to Candelaria and then cut across and made the retrieval. Here's the satellite picture once again of the area. And El Llano is actually a very large formation here. It's approximately 60 miles north-south and 20 miles east-west, which represents about a 1,200 square mile area. We are still planning to go out there, and there are tiny little ranches that dot that whole area, and we're still scheduled to go out there and interview some more of the people who live in relative isolation out there. So one of the places we did get a chance to go to was we wanted to go to the ranch, which is on kind of the southern part of the El Rancho Formation. Mm-hmm. There's a ranch called El Llano.
Here you see a sign that says Ranchos, and it gives you all the different ranches that are in that area.
This is put up, every now and then you run into a sign like this. It's put up by the local Cattlemen's Association. There's no other way to know your way around. Some of these signs, unfortunately, have gotten twisted and turned around, or some of them are full of shotgun holes and you can't read the names anymore, but luckily we did find this one. And we got to this spot, and there you see the same thing we were looking at on the Google Earth map. There's that white sand that from outer space looks very interesting. And like we mentioned earlier, there are quite a high degree, even to this day, of UFO sightings and other strange phenomena going on in this area still. You've got Candelaria, Texas is off in this direction. Over here you can start to see the peaks of the Chinati Mountains located in Marfa, Texas, which some of you may be familiar with a mysterious atmospheric, or so they say, phenomenon known as the Marfa Lights, mystery orbs of light that appear around Marfa, Texas. So they are always seen in the area of the Chinati Mountains, and that happens on a recurring basis. So this just to set this kind of really isolated and desolate part of the Chihuahuan Desert. And this video clip will kind of just show you when we first visited El Llano and give you kind of a quick panorama of the area.
As Noe was saying, we had a chance to meet a number of people out there, and what just really blew us away was how the types of stories that were telling us about UFOs that would go out, actually land in some of those particular ranches. There's with some trace landing marks, or where they have no vegetation growing. This is what one of the ranch owners had shared with us. An interesting story, which we'll share with you very shortly, is when we meet with the mayor's wife, something that she shared with us just several weeks ago.
Now here's an additional, just quick little thing I'm going to toss in here. There have been a number of U.S. Experimental aircraft and missiles that have gone down in and around this area over the years. So that introduces another layer of complexity to this. We don't know, as has been discussed during this conference, what kind of top secret military hardware from the U.S. may have either deliberately or accidentally strayed into this part of Mexico.
We do know, going along with that, what Noe was mentioning about the missiles, in our book we have a whole chapter devoted to the Mexican missile crisis. Back in 1947, Operation Paperclip, where they brought German technicians over and they launched V-2s, and there were 2 incidents of 2 V-2s that crashed close into Juarez, right across El Paso. Another one in 1967 that landed right here in this particular area near Coyame. And then, of course, in 1970 in the area known as La Zona de Silencio, the Zone of Silence. And this was an Athena rocket that was launched out in Utah, and it had a contaminated area. It was carrying cobalt-57 So again, it was another, as we were getting into the UFO research, and then you heard Nick talk about Operation Moondust, Blue Fly, all these other excuses possibly to cover up UFO crashes as well.
Okay, we talked to many people in the area, and you'll find more information in our book, but we're just going to highlight some of the folks there that really made an impression on us. Before I start that, I want to say that the people in Coyame are the most humble, down-to-earth, spiritual, simple people, very friendly. They extended us the deepest courtesy. They're just friendly and welcoming and wonderful people. When people ask me things like, well, are they making up this stuff that they're talking about, UFO sightings and all of this? There is absolutely nothing in their demeanor or in their background or in their intent that you can read that would lead one to believe that they would have any reason on earth to be making this stuff up. And the crew, the television production crew that was with us and cast of this show, of this cable show, were deeply touched and impressed by them, by every single person that we interviewed. Here's the crash site again. One of the witnesses that really gave us a lot of really good information, and we think there's a tie-in to the 1974 event. This is El Llano, where we think the initial crash site happened. And not too far away here, just a few miles away, is the Pedro Venegas Ranch, right down here in the area known as Carrizo.
How much time?
We're gonna, this is a picture that we took there at his ranch, and you know, this humble little area. He doesn't spend his full time there. He actually has a residence in a nearby small village, but he goes out here to look after his livestock and spends several days at a time there. So Pedro Venegas told us a very interesting story. He has had a number of UFO experiences while he's been out here in the dead of night, in the middle of this foreboding desert, where at night the sky is absolutely dark, and you can see every star in the sky. And he's had a number of luminous orb. He's seen a number of luminous orbs arc across the sky. He was describing them to us. And then he also told us the very interesting story about something that he remembers from 1974. He unfortunately did not record the exact date of the 1974 event, but he remembers that in the year 1974, in the nighttime, one night, there was a series of tremendous explosions that rocked his little ranch house and rattled the glass on the windows. It was so loud. And that little piece, that little snippet of testimony that we got from someone who lives within 5 or 10 miles of what we suspected was the mid-air crash site, really gave us encouragement to continue researching this project. After that, he began taking copious notes. He was motivated. He began taking notes about his UFO incidents after that, and he showed us notebooks full of information about things that he has seen in the skies there above his ranch since the 1974 series of explosions that he remembers hearing. The owner of a nearby ranch that's just adjacent to there is an attorney from Chihuahua City, which is the capital of Chihuahua State, Jorge Gonzalez, who has been very cordial host to us on several occasions. He runs a business there called Coyame Hunting, and where he invites people from all over, from the U.S. and Mexico, to go and hunt deer on his property only during certain times of year. And he's the owner of 2 large ranches there. And he's the one that has told us about numerous sightings that have taken place. He himself has seen formations of objects. He and other partners of his have seen have had numerous UFO encounters. I think Ruben, he shared with you this last time that we went, or the time before, some of what he has seen.
Basically, he and this other gentleman that we'll be showing shortly This is Mr. Javier Baeza, who's the head of the Coyame Cattlemen's Association. Both he and the other gentleman, they were traveling at night, and they observed these lights that were just high above, and then one light would stop, and it would just take off, and it would come back to the formation, another light. It was the middle of a rainstorm, but then he was sharing with us this Mr. Javier Baeza was sharing us other stories about lights appearing over his home, and then the whole door frame would light up, daylight sightings that he and the other ranchers had seen. So again, it's a very, very interesting spot for us to go back to. And this is Elizabeth Rodriguez Almendares. She's the owner of the restaurant, and she's also the mayor's wife. And she told us something really interesting. She said that just about the week before we arrived, that one of the ranchers had come up to her and said that he was washing clothes with his wife, and he noticed outside the air was turning reddish, pinkish color. And out there on his property, there's these caves or big holes, and he said you could throw something deep down, and you won't even hear it. So it's very, very deep. Well, anyway, all of a sudden he sees this luminous object go down into the hole, and he's really freaked out, and his wife says, "Oh, don't worry about that. It won't do anything to you." And he says, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, they come in and out frequently." So when we heard that, we said, Noe, I think that's something we eventually would need to go back and meet with this rancher. So
yeah,
really,
one of the folks that was with us with the production crew was Bill Burns, William J. Burns, the editor of UFO magazine. And so he talked at length with Elizabeth about this, and he intends to follow up, and so do we, to get more information about these luminous orbs that are seen coming up out of the earth there. And Ruben, I'm just going to go back to one of the previous slides so I can show on the map where exactly we're talking about. Okay, this was a suspected mid-air collision crash site. Here's Pedro's Venegas Ranch. And somewhere in between these 2 points, somewhere in here, is where this rancher told Elizabeth, the owner of the restaurant, the mayor's wife, that they see these luminous orbs just shooting up out of the earth, out of these cracks and crevices in the earth, and then going back down in there. So that was one of the things that just very recently has come out of this. This was our team from a couple of weeks ago when we went down there. Dr. Ron Milioni, Pat Uskert, Bill Burns, Ruben, and myself. We filmed for over 20 hours, and that's going to form the basis of an upcoming television documentary.
We were also met with an investigative team from Chihuahua. They showed their vehicle, which is really packed with antennas, laptops, everything that they use in investigations.
This is us at the crew at the Mysterious Pit location for filming. Dr. Ron Milioni here in the middle, and Bill Burns to the right there, talking about the strange properties of some of the debris that we found around there. And Dr. Milioni was going around to make sure that the chain of evidence was preserved. The items that were found were bagged in specimen bags. They were labeled, and all of this was going to be taken for further analysis. And here's another shot of the filming going on in the desert. And here, Bill Burns, editor of UFO magazine, is standing here. You see the circular area of blackened earth out there. We've got some more areas. We've got more field work to do. There's a lot more work to be done here. We're just needing some more funding. So, a Coyame resident recently told us about the discovery of another pit nearby on a cattle ranch known as El Aguadero, about 25 miles west of Coyame. And they found in there, he was looking for Indian artifacts one day, and he found a pit in which was the charred remains of a human skull. And he found out from an elderly gentleman who works in the area that about 30 or 40 years ago, between 50 and 60 burned human bodies had been found inside the pit. So the time frame on that would be 1967 to 1977. The remains were hastily removed by the Mexican military, and everyone was kept away from the site. And this is the location for this other pit. And here it is on Google Earth. We're just going to quickly share with you a couple of cases that have, we feel, a direct impact. There were 3 objects almost identical in shape, size, and description that surrounded a small plane also in this area that was on its way to Mexico City. The pilot, who is still living and has given us, has spoken to Ruben on many occasions, has given us his testimony that these at least one of these silver discs made physical contact with his airplane. Carlos de los Santos is the pilot's name. He was in a state of panic, and we're going to show you a short audio clip in a moment of his conversation with the radio tower at Mexico City Airport.
This happened right around May of 1975, so it's very similar.
It happened 9 months after the alleged UFO crash retrieval in Coyame. So we're going to play just this short video clip. And it's in Spanish, of course, but you're going to hear...
Can you turn it up loud, please? Mayday, mayday. He's giving his directions where he's at. This was approximately 18 minutes where he's flying his plane, and he had no control of this airplane. The plane was actually picked up from 10,000 feet up to 14,000 feet. It was not pressurized. And so you could see here, that's just a clip of a minute, but we have the full testimony. Plus, this was being tracked by Mexican radar in Mexico City, and they confirmed that his plane was being surrounded by 3 objects.
There was also a Mexican government plane nearby that noticed that this was going on.
So actually, as it indicated here, when he later landed there at the Mexico City airport, his airplane undercarriage had been dented by one of the UFOs. And this came out nationally, ladies and gentlemen. This came out on the newspapers, radio, and it's part of our connection with the Coyame case.
There was another case also in the Coyame area in 1973 where the nephew of former Mexican President Adolfo López Mateos he stopped his car and took a picture of this UFO right in the Coyame area. It was carried by the Mexican press. When he first attempted to take a picture, he felt a sensation that something was preventing him from taking the picture. But he was finally able to overcome that, and this on the screen is the resulting picture as it was published in Mexican newspapers in 1973. He noticed 3 colors, orange, purple, and red. It generated a low vibration and seemed to permeate everything around him. It hovered about 200 feet away.
If we could just hold it right there just for a second there. This photo supposedly was taken with a Polaroid camera, and it kind of reminded me of the photo that Linda showed yesterday of a craft over Albuquerque. So when I saw her photograph and saw this, I said, gee, there's some similarities.
And once again, this craft is similar in appearance to what the soldier supposedly found crashed in the desert nearby Coyame. And finally, while we were working on this case, we ran across stories about other border area crash retrievals that have happened over the years. And the most fascinating one We thought we weren't going to be able to find the jet pilot who was involved because this happened in the middle 1950s, but we were finally able to locate him. He's 82 years old, and he's living near Wichita Falls, Texas. And he was featured in a report on television channel in Dallas that was done in the year 2000. And we talked to the reporter. We finally got located the reporter who did that report, and he told us where this gentleman lived. He didn't know an address or phone number, but he knew the town, the name of the town. So we went to see him, and he has given us fascinating testimony about a crash retrieval that happened in 1955.
You know, just to go back real quickly, again, going back to what Linda was mentioning earlier and how she's receiving emails from military personnel. What's fascinating about this case is that when you get involved in a crash retrieval, it opens up the doors. I mean, we've came across 4 or 5 other cases already. And the other thing is you're already part of a disclosure campaign, because when you find individuals like this, like this individual here who was an Air Force person who was in World War II, was in Korea, and then had some decorations. I mean, this man is very credible, and to me, he's a hero. So I just wanted to point that out real quickly.
We're going to listen to a short audio clip in which he basically summarizes his experience.
Yeah, we were in Texas.
Can you turn it up?
The aircraft that we were flying cover for was out of New York. We had some B-52s we was flying cover for.
Oh, okay.
And B-47s.
The B-47s and B-52s.
Yeah.
Wow. What kind of plane were you flying in?
Yep, 86s.
Okay. When you were on your mission, did you see something? You and your.
Yeah, we were going across there, and one of the bomber pilots called me and he said, "What is that you see up in front of us, sir? Up about another 20 degrees." And I looked up there, and it was a great big, pretty, looked like stars, you know. And I said, "No, that's not no star." And about that time, it made a 90-degree turn to the right.
Wow.
And doing about 2,000 miles an hour. And I knew that wasn't no airplane either. And went on over there a little bit, and I said, when we get through here, I'm going to go look at that. And so they went on to Washington, state of Washington.
I see.
And another fighter escort picked them up over there about the line of Arizona. And I turned around and went back to Fort Worth. And then I got in a small plane and went down there where that thing looked like it crashed.
Now, the fascinating story actually begins there. He went back to Fort Worth and picked up a small CAP airplane, and he and another man flew down to where he saw the object crash, and he actually landed his small plane there, and they walked in the midst of a 300-yard debris field, small, shiny, metallic debris, and there was a furrow, and then they saw an object impacted into the side of a hill. And he tells this fascinating story. It was being guarded by Mexican soldiers. He picked up a piece of the debris, which he later had he himself analyzed, tried to cut it with torches and so forth, and the piece of metal could not be marred, could not be deformed. It was unlike anything that we know of on this earth. So it's a fascinating story. He's given us many, many hours of testimony, and we've actually got a book on his case almost ready for publication.
Yeah, we were in Texas.
Oops. Let's stop that, and that's it.
Just to end that, as Noe had said, that, you know, as we're opening up these cases, and when Willingham had told us that when he crossed the river, he was met by a Mexican soldier, and the Mexican soldier said, "We're here waiting for someone from the United States Air Force." and he said, "I am from the United States Air Force." He spoke a little Spanish, so he took him to the wreckage, and then he observed there were no trucks, just vehicles and jeeps. And that opens up a whole door there. I mean, we're seeing where the Mexican military is involved in, with the United States in retrievals. And this is the pattern that we're beginning to see. So
we invite everybody to visit our website, mexicosroswell.com. There's no apostrophe in it, mexicosroswell.com. We have just a handful of books left at our table in the back. If anybody hasn't picked up a copy yet, we'll be happy to sign those for you. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, you know, for the people that haven't been to all the crash retrieval conferences, we had, well, believed genuine alien parts at the first, second, third. We missed the fourth, and this is sort of like half pregnant, I guess, for the fifth. So we're in the next conference, we're going to have more alien parts here, because we need to have them and show them and talk to people about them. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our adventure for the weekend here into Crash Retrievals. And I thank you so much for coming. Make sure to get all the DVDs, order the sets, or whichever ones you want back in the corner. I'm personally going to get like 5 copies of Michael Schratt's talk. I got to give that away for Christmas. And so I'm delighted that you all came, and it turned out great. Thanks.